Record. Um, if you have any concerns about recording, don't want to be featured, Izzy will pop her email in the chat and just drop her a message. We want to make sure that we don't interrupt our speakers today. So if you could keep yourself on mute if you're not talking, that would be brilliant. And we'd really encourage you to use a chat throughout this session to share any reflections, questions, and we'll do our best to feed that into today's discussion. And just to confirm, we will be sharing the recording and sharing slides after the session. So you'll have all of that content in the coming days. So as a bit of context for today's part of a series of events that Collaborate and partners are hosting as part of the latest round of Human-Learning.Systems research, which was published in November 2024, along with lots of new case studies, some of which we'll hear from today. We recognise that people joining today have different levels of familiarity with human learning systems, so I'm going to give a brief introduction just to make sure we're all on the same page. So in brief, Human Learning Systems, HLS, is a way to make public service work better for people. And when I say public service, I'm using this term broadly to mean the work of all partners focused on enabling people and communities to flourish, including, importantly, the voluntary and community sector. And HLS is really about recognising that the world we live in is complex, each of our lives are complex, and outcomes emerge from the constant interaction of all the actors and factors going on in our lives. Single services do not create outcomes. Outcomes emerge from all of these different interactions. So HLS is about recognising complexity and working with complexity. The dominant way of managing public services over the last few decades, new public management, aim to kind of control complexity and use compliance. Even if we haven't heard of it, we've probably experienced it. So, standardized top-down services, a focus on treating people as separate problems to be fixed, a focus on competition rather than collaboration. So through action research over the past few years with charities, funders, commissioners, public services, Collaborate, Dr. Toby Lowe and our partners have seen that kind of many people are looking for a different way that works with complexity rather than seeking to control it, which we're increasingly finding just doesn't work and can have unintended consequences and undermine some of what we're trying to achieve. So in talking to lots of different types of organisation, working across in different policy areas, in different places, we're seeing people develop ways of working that have some common features. So firstly, human, ways of working that value relationships, focus on strengths and what matter to people, and enabling decision making much closer to communities. Secondly, learning, so recognising that we're in complex contexts that are always changing, we need to be constantly learning and adapting to enable ongoing improvement. Learning becomes a strategy rather than something we do at the end of a project or intervention. And thirdly, systems. It's about recognising that systems are connected and interdependent. We need to create the conditions for better outcomes through nurturing healthier systems, systems where we work and learn together and share power. And when I say systems, I basically just mean all those different actors and factors that combine to create outcomes. So for us at Collaborate, place is a key frontier as HLS develops. Today, Human-Learning.Systems has mostly focused on projects, services, organisations, but as HLS matures, we see whole place approaches as a real opportunity to spread the practice, create more wide-scale change, and also embed this way of working for the long term. So today we're going to hear from speakers where there are kind of multiple instances of HLS in practice or intentional efforts to take a whole place approach that reaches beyond kind of single projects or service areas. And a few reasons why we think this is a really interesting topic. So HLS is about devolving decision-making close to people closest to the issue, with other levels playing an enabling role rather than controlling top-down. So today, we're really interested in, what does HLS mean for each of our roles as we devolve decision-making closer to communities? We've all got different skills, insights, connections, sources of legitimacy. So particularly in the context of devolution, what does this mean for each of all of our roles if we put decision-making closer to communities? And how do we make sure in the context of devolution that decision makers and communities get closer rather than further apart? Another angle we're interested in exploring today is that HLS tends to focus on kind of people services, but we know that our lives are shaped by the economy, geography, landscapes, the built environment. So In creating the conditions for people to thrive, how can we all think about and work with a broader conception of place that goes beyond kind of just people services? And we're really interested in what other disciplines and practices does HLS need to sit alongside. It's definitely not the answer to everything. So there's some of the questions we'll be exploring today, and we're going to hear from examples working at different scales of place to explore some of these questions and each of our roles in this practice. Some of the examples you'll hear from today take human learning systems as an explicit starting point, whereas others are more generally focused on relational, collaborative, and adaptive practice. So to get us started on the question of what's the potential of place-based approaches to HLS, I'm going to introduce you to our speakers. We're going to hear from each of them for about 10 to 15 minutes. They'll hopefully set the scene for us, and then we'll move into a Q&A. So we're really excited by the diversity of different people joining us today from lots of different places, different roles. So we really welcome your questions, reflections in the chat as we go. And then Jenny in a moment will pick up those questions as we enter into a Q&A session. As I said, we're going to kind of go through our speakers at different levels of place. So we're going to start with people working at the most hyperlocal level and then work up to Adrian, who's working at a regional level. So to start with, I'm delighted to welcome Fozia Haider and Eric Bamler. They work for Gateshead Bridge Builders. And they're just going to share a little bit about them, their work, and kind of how HLS features as part of that. So over to you, Fozia and Eric.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much on behalf of Gateshead Community Bridge Builders for inviting us along today. I'm here with my colleague, Eric. Eric, you want to say hello?
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Bamela, part of the Community Bridge Builder as well.
So we're part of the Gateshead Community Bridge Builders. We're a group of 10 people, a team of 10 people. There's 6 community bridge builders, and we have a planning group made up of 4 people, including Dr. Andrew Crosby and Dr. Richard Gibbons. I've just seen the message on the chat. You can read more about us and our team. We have a website, and I'm sure the link is there. So I'm just going to start off by talking a bit about the bridge builder role and what we do, and just set the scene, and then we'll go on to explain a bit more about our work, and then and what HLS means to us, and what we need, what can we enable, and what do we need others to enable. The Gateshead Community Bridge Builders are working to build power and capacity at the heart of communities. We want local people to have the opportunities, skills, and confidence to engage in making decisions that will improve their lives now and in the future. And to do that, we're building new participative models of community decision making and supporting local people to feel confident enough to be part of them. So what do we do? First of all, we're funded as to work in Gateshead. We have a focus in Gateshead with the Gateshead communities. We listen very deeply, work very closely to them, and we look at their strengths and unmet needs of the Gateshead folk. Diversity is huge. Our team is made up of 80% of diverse people. So 6 out of the 6 bridge builders, 5 of us are from marginalised communities. So we have lived experience of working with different communities, and we are from different diverse backgrounds. we build areas of work and mutual interest, or as we call bridges between different communities and between communities. A little bit more about how we work, build bridges between communities. We've got Eric here who will talk about the African platform and his project. And we also collaborate with institutions on change and at the local and system levels. In our team, we all have equal rights, something that's very rare that you find in other organizations. But the way the team is set up, we all are paid the same. We sit on the GCB coordination team as a decision maker and team member. We work closely with each other and share ideas, and we work with other organizations as well, who we work very closely with. We engage, build strength, and we maintain good networks with partners, communities and organizations in and out of our area of work. Good relations is very important in this work, because that's what we rely on to actually take our work forward. We work with host organizations, so each bridge builder, apart from me, are hosted by a third sector organization in Gateshead. I'm actually fiscally hosted by the Social Change Nest, which is about to change soon, but I can't really say a lot about that. But again, an exciting move, and hopefully if it does happen, it'll mean that I can really take my work forward. As we said, we're hosted by a third sector organization. We maintain good relationships and communication with the host. We actually give 20% of our work time to the host organizations on work that's mutually beneficial to the Gateshead Bridge Builder team and to them as well. So, where we actually are bringing their organizations in to working in the way that the Great Gateshead Bridge Builder team works. So a little bit about me and Eric first. Firstly, me, as I said, I'm part of the Gateshead Bridge Builder team. I've been here for about 2 years with them. Before that, I used to work in public health, and I've worked across the charity sector as well. And whilst I was working on the census with the ONS, I bumped into with the Gateshead Bridge Builder team, with one of the planning team members, Dr. Rich Gibbons, who and I was fascinated when I heard about the work and how what they were doing. So I made an intention that I will actually look at this when I finish my contract, and here we are. It did take about 18 months for my move, but I have to say it's been the most liberating role that I've done. I work with marginalised women in my role as a bridge builder, and I run a project called the Women's Health Cafe. So it's predominantly South Asian women that I work with, and we focus on bringing them into decision-making spaces where traditionally they've never been involved. So things that really matter to them about their health, language barriers, communication skills, building their skills, and really giving them exposure into the health system and educating them so that they can actually take part in what actually matters to them and get involved. Eric, I'll just pass on to you to say a bit about your role now.
Yeah. Hello everyone again. Thanks, Fuzia. I say I'm Eric. I'm also part of the Bridge Builders since so say 2001. It has been really great to be part of this lovely group and for this year and to see how it can be also very, very beneficial for community having a different way of funding for the usual model of funding that is usually being diverse for charities, but the Bridge Builder have been funded in a different way to work closely to community, closely to people, work with people, understand what people. So our work is based on people needs, on people reflection to give them more voice basis. As part of the African platform and alongside them, it has been very, very difficult first to bring community forward because community have been mostly in the Northeast, I would say community has been forgotten, not really playing very role on community areas or be involved in sort of a work around the area. But because of the Bridge Builder and the role that I've played in the community, we first created a platform where we have now 12 communities involved in the African platform, which is not really easy because having 12 identity in a platform, you can imagine how it's huge. We have a huge language barrier because having 12 community is not one language that we all speak. So sometimes we do navigate through that, but so we do have someone or anyone in the community who speak like more than 2 or 3 languages that we can communicate together. And it's a really huge impact. Of course, that we can see how the language barrier can be also difficult amongst the African platform because we are coming from the same area. And because we are not also in the UK from the same issue, and then we have very good sort of situation that brings everyone in the UK. So sometimes it's quite difficult to also walk through that with different people or different communities. With the Bridge Builder, it has been very easy because from the African platform or community, we never have such kind of role where someone is paid to work alongside them to build something with the community. So the community has been that no one has the time to build that capacity around community to create a space where we can have decision making, where we can be more involved in action through our local area or to participate in other sorts of events or anything to raise our voice in sort of project or action in our local area. So through that, with the time that I was given by the Bridge Builder, it was to create that, was to bring community together, to build something, and then create a decision place where community has a voice, where to say and everything. So by the end, we created a program, which was a real project that was called Sport and Wellbeing, where we bring community together through around activities. The weekend, who works very well now. We have a lot of participants every weekend where we have sport. Beyond sport now, we tackle other challenges that we have, or other challenges that everyone's facing through his life. Mostly, the sport and well-being was shaped for new arrivals in the area because moving from asylum seeker, mostly, there are a lot of asylum seekers. We are isolated. So we walk through around hotels and MEAS accommodation to inform them that we have this action that's taking place every weekend, and then where we can signpost all kind of people, all kind of asylum seekers who newly arrive in the area. So from there, we also signpost straight away to different communities. So it has been also a key point where people meet and where community meets and where community can now try to build up. It has been very, very, very good for since 1 year that we are running the sport and well-being project. We see more people involved. We see more new people every weekend. We see how people really integrate through the area. but in another way, we see also how since the, if we're going back in the past, since the COVID, we see how community has been regathered again together, because COVID has bring a bit community to be gathered together. But the other part of that, which is quite funny, the services have been restricted a bit far away from communities. The services have been changes. We see a massive change around all side services. We see services will close. We see services where it was absolutely more easier in the past than now more difficult for community to be involved in. And mostly it's the language barrier, is how to communicate. Who is the person that is there? Is the person more training to how to welcome new people, or how to define our languages, something like that. So it has been very, very difficult with a lot of people from those areas. And from there, we try, myself and other kind of services that we have in GetSet and Newcastle, we create the GetSet service user, which is a very, very small group where we have the housing department, the learning system, and then we have MIAS, migrant help, and the migrant department in GetSet Council, where we usually discuss about mostly housing issue, which is the more biggest problem that we have now from refugee, which has newly granted, and then they have one choice of housing, or there is not any houses when they refuse to go to the hotel. So from there, we usually have some specific discussion that we see alongside the area around refugee or around migrants, mostly in those different needs. How do we shape that, or how do we relocate that? What is good? Which kind of information do we need to bring back to the African platform for everyone to be at the same level of information? So it's quite sometimes difficult when someone arrives in the area and then be in that kind of situation, mostly families, because there's lack of houses, there's lack of more integration, and mostly when it goes now on the public health sector, how it's normally shaped for them. Sometimes they do not understand a bit how things work, and then go again around with them to explain them how, when you are ill, this is how you need, because they are not quite used on that service road. And we see mostly how the NHS change a bit the approach now by sending text message to people about appointment and this. And sometimes it's quite difficult for people to interpret that. First, because we have also those kind of situation of data problem, because they don't have money and such, or they can't communicate in English, or the way they have to go and stress for the closest pharmacy to get their drugs. And so we see a lot of difficulties like this, where usually communities are really bringing it up, where to go, how to do this, how to do that, but there is not any space where there is a specific place where there is learning about how to use all those systems. So we see like community are really, really live alone on that kind of help, and we do kind of help a bit with what we can, but we see like from now, we see more services going a bit very far away from community, and we try by working with GetSet College and Newcastle College. That was one topic that was being bring back again in discussion, and there were a few meetings how to use those kind of services. And Newcastle College in their system, they have implemented that to also share with the asylum seeker and refugee how to use the NHS system, or to book an appointment or some. But it's still difficult because we still have the problem of language barrier. And the last meeting that we have, it was a very constructive meeting, because we were discussing around the ESOL model, is the SL model is it a very good model for the asylum seeker and refugee? If we have maybe an asylum seeker for 5 or 4 years in the SL model, and then going out of that and then having again lack of communicating English, and then all that. So what can be good, or how can we change that approach? But we see, like, even in those college, we see how the place has been reducing a lot because of funding. And that's also been a very, very challenging situation that we have now in different colleges around the Northeast, because we see the ASOL dropping down a bit because of funding, because of teacher, because of the spaces now to give to asylum seeker and refugee. So it has been very difficult, and we constantly see that, and we discuss with them. They are really kind to open their door. We discuss with them to have a new way how to help again around English, because that's a main key problem that they face on. But we can see there is a little bit that is done by different charities, but which is not enough. Mostly the key point that we have on those communities, it's language. But we also bear in mind that when it comes on marginalized community, we almost focus on refugee, on asylum seeker, which is not only the people that we have, because we have student and economic migrants, which are now refugee and asylum seeker, who find themselves in the UK on another way on a daily basis, so which is not the same way as the others. So sometimes we do work with them, and then they have different approach where they don't find maybe themselves in the system because they don't have all those beneficial works as a refugee has, because they are refugee. But then they have to go through a very long process to benefit their visa or houses of anything. They have to pay everything because they are not involved in the system. So we also, those kind of category of economic migrants or students, they also face a lot of challenges, that they are more involved now in every single aspect of activity or project that we put in place. We see more students now in there because there is no more a lot of aims or a lot of help in through and around the academic system, because they don't have funding, or the funding is not more enough for them to continue. So we see how things navigate through that. But what's been good, because the African platform is trying now to build such a way to understand a bit where community are, how community are based, how do we work together, which is not really easier, but we try to do our best to bring everyone in the table, and then see how everyone be part of the integration system that we are trying to put in place.
Thanks, Eric. We're out of time, but Fuzzy, I just wanted to check, were there any kind of concluding thoughts you wanted to feed in before we hand over?
Yeah, you can see the passion that's coming from Eric, but so sorry we went a little bit over time. But yeah, just to conclude, I just want to say a little bit about what a place-based approach to a HLS means to us. I think it's about fostering good relationships. So that's what we've really focused on, working with other organizations and communities. And that's at the, core, at the heart of what we do. We also understand that we can't really do this work alone, and vice versa. We all are serving the same communities, but we need to work together to actually achieve meaningful change. It's also been a huge privilege, to make change to communities at the end of social justice. And it's a very rare opportunity. And I always say it's been one of the most liberating roles that I have done, because in other roles, you've got limitations, bureaucracy and red tape. And I've worked in both public sector and charity sector before, but this way of working has really, really opened doors and opened conversations and opened hearts and minds to this kind of working. So it's been a huge privilege. And the other thing is, what can we actually enable, and what do we need others to enable? So initiating conversations and building relations, as I said, with the public sector and others, and that needs to continue. What we need from others is actual honesty and transparency and the intention to make change. And by acknowledging their limitations, we have limitations as well. We can't do this work alone. And we've got to involve the communities in decision making. You know, we always hear seldom heard, hard to reach. What we really ask from other organizations is, you know, there's a lot of talk around cultural competency, but there has to be cultural attunement. You know, so Gateshead Community Brush Builders is a very rare team that you will come across, because, you know, we're so culturally diverse, but we're also culturally attuned. And the last thing I want to say is we actually need to think about our agendas and think about other people's agendas as well. So not just going, just, you know, I've got this to do. We have, you know, these boxes to tick. What you find in the public sector, you know, say for instance, public health research, something that I work very closely in my role. You know, because of this role, I've tried to, you know, I think differently now. Whereas when I was before in public health, working with the same communities, you know, we've got to really think about the communities and what they want. So actually involve them. So it has to be community led. And just finally, I think it's very fair to say that we're living in really difficult times. So world leadership is not setting a very good example at the moment, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we need more work like this. We need work like this to be sustained. We need funding into this work. You know, we can't write people off. And that's what, you know, the climate is at the moment, you know. So we need to change that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fozia. Thanks so much, Eric. Yeah, you really brought to life there how we devolve decision making closer to communities, but also the ways we need to fundamentally reimagine how we're organised, and the kind of real focus on relationships. Building trusted relationships is so crucial, and at different levels of a place. Thanks so much, both. We will get to dig in more into your work and hear more from you in the Q&A in a moment. But at this point, I'm going to hand over to you, Matt, from Plymouth Octopus Project.
Great, thank you. Well, I mean, if we all started with where Eric and Fozia started, I think we probably resolved 50% at least of the issues that we face across our social and public sector. The importance of community-led change and community power is undervalued and underestimated, I think, across the work. And I guess coming from a similar perspective, but I guess perhaps a level of organization above where the community bridge builders are. At Plymouth Octopus, we look and come from the grassroots. So I don't, yeah, brilliant, stay there. I just wanted to kind of bring to life what I mean by the grassroots. We broadly use under 100,000 turnover as a kind of rule of thumb. And the diversity in the sector, I can only really speak to Plymouth, is incredible. So I just wanted to kind of just name a few things just to kind of bring it alive. So we've got Slane, who is a traveller, or was a traveller, passionate about social justice, who started an incredibly inclusive community performance platform, helping people to first find their voice and then to express it. We've got Sally, who lives in Early Settle, a neighbourhood in Plymouth. Really didn't do much around the community until about 5-6 years ago. And through a whole load of confidence building and finding her own voice, is now at the centre of the Ernie Settle Community Network. We've got Alan, who now an older man, he wouldn't mind me saying that, came out in his teens, so quite a while ago, and really struggled as he grew up in Plymouth to kind of find who he was, and became the centre of Plymouth Pride, the movement across Plymouth, celebrating LGBTQ plus people and communities. We've got Jabo and Lillian, so Rwandan refugees who started Diversity Business Incubator to tackle poverty in the refugee and BAME population through entrepreneurship. We've got Lisa and Mariam, professional dancers who discovered that through their passion for dancing, they could take that into cancer patients, to benefit cancer patients. We've got Hannah and Wendy, who are residents in Stonehouse, another neighbourhood in Plymouth, who joined their local residents association, becoming activated around community, suddenly realising that it wasn't quite working for their community, who are now the well-known Nudge community builders. Got Caroline, who didn't want older people to live in quite significant isolation as her dad did. Started Red Velvet Cinema, so plays the kind of golden oldie films for a group of older people to come together. And the list is endless. The list is absolutely endless. What I'm trying to point out and highlight there is that when communities come together, they come together out of passion, love, and care. And that, I think, is quite different to many other places and types of organization that you might come across. So if we move on, I'm going to skip over the next few slides quite quickly. So why we're doing this, we can go back quickly, just one slide. So why we're all doing this and why communities come together around the issues that we all face. So if we look at a map of Plymouth in a few years' time, under the average kind of annual flood level, quite significant parts of the city will be flooded. And so move on a little bit. And one of the things that we're observing is that there's a huge gap between what we're doing and what our aspirations might be. So next slide. And this is what, in various different words and different language, I think we're all trying to strive for is a just and regenerative world. And what we think is that we need fundamentally different ways of imagining, listening, knowing, and working and organizing together. So next slide, please. So one of the conversations that we are trying to kind of bring forward in Plymouth is how do we do that at a city scale? How do we take the voice of people in community, of the grassroots sector, and actually hear it, actually listen. POP's membership is 380 odd members, most of which are under 100,000 turnover. And what we find is that because they generally don't get counted, so they're not necessarily on the register anywhere, and because they're tiny and their reach might be small and at an individual level, but obviously much bigger collectively, that generally it's not seen and it's not heard. So how do we not only see and hear it, but how do we value it in a way that doesn't destroy the actual value that community and grassroots brings? So at a city scale, we're trying to think about, well, how do we hold and host that conversation as a system convener? And how do we then link it to those broader issues that we face? Next slide, please. So one of the big shifts that we see is how we go from this default power over situation to a more default power with situation. So, and power over is coercion. So, the common law definition of employment is that you are controlled by someone else. Now that's coercive. And that's our default. That's our foundation. It doesn't mean that everything from that point is coercive. We can build beautiful things on top of that coercive platform, but ultimately the default and the backstop is that it's coercion. So how do we move away from that into something that is much more based on trust and relationships? And how can we go from the micro examples of, working in our individual teams or looking at grassroots organizations and so on? How do we go from those micro kind of situations into a kind of system? And how can we do that at scale? So if we move on. So we think the change starts with us. We can't create new patterns until we're actually exploring new patterns internally to ourselves. So how do we listen to ourselves? What kind of emotional and personal work that we're doing individually, and then collectively, how are we working differently together? And I guess I just want to kind of give a big up to the pop team who are just wonderful and amazing. So next slide. So as the patterns repeat, so if we're working at an individual level, and we start to influence the groups and the teams around us to be working differently, and we're using that like emotional connection to feeling controlled. So if you're in a situation and you feel like you're not able to say the things that you want to say in order to direct the work, then why is that? Is it because actually the person in front of you, you really trust what they're saying, so you don't feel like you need to have that voice? But if it's because of power or rank or privilege that you're not able to have that voice, then that's where we need to use that emotional compass to steer away from that and into situations where actually we're more comfortable and we're more able to have our own voice. Um, and someone like me who I guess occupies quite a lot of the time a position of privilege, how can I provide the platform and the places for those voices to come forward? And I think everyone in positions of privilege and power and rank need to ask similar questions about, well, how are we opening up that space for others to come into? Because we are the change. If the system is us, and so therefore the system is a reflection of how we're working. So therefore, if we want the system to be different, we need to work differently. So what different rules are we using when we come together? So next slide, please. So across Plymouth, we would say that we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of these different spaces that are coming together in different ways. They're coming together because they want to. They're coming together because they have lived experience. They have a passion about the change that they want to make. Now, that is happening on a daily basis in all of our communities. So how are we not only valuing the impact that that makes, so we know that that creates a healthier community, we know it creates a safer community, and we know it creates a wealthier community. So how are we valuing the impact? But not only that, how are we actually using it as an opportunity to learn about how humans can come together in different ways? Next slide, please. And this is why we think place and neighborhoods are really important context. Because we think this is where in terms of physical proximity, and I think physical proximity is a really important aspect to this. People can physically be in the same room together. That's where we get the overlap between services, between communities, between grassroots, between businesses, because often one person might hold different hats. They're both a member of the community, but they're also a service delivery professional. So it's it's where we can start to kind of unpack some of this, and how can we liberate our communities and liberate staff at the same time in order to create that space between the liminal space where something new might arise and come up. So next slide, please. So so we think that one of the places and contexts that we can do this most effectively is in neighbourhoods. Um, we're lucky in Plymouth. We not only got an amazing grassroots sector, but we've got amazing leaders like Wendy and Hannah at Nudge Community Builders. And we've got services that are trying to do things differently. So we've got the Plymouth Alliance. We've got a great Changing Futures program. So we've got aspects across the city that are trying to do things differently. So we think we need to unpack all of that in a manageable context and a context that people can be part of. And the only place that we can really think about that happening is in neighborhood. So how can we create these demonstrators? And that's where I think we need like significant and dedicated investment into that activity, because this work naturally clashes with existing power structures. So you need to have some kind of independence, and you need to have the space created by senior leadership to be able to say, this is going to be uncomfortable, but we know we need to go in this direction. So next slide, please. So, I mean, we see this is just a bit like, how do we know this might work? Well, the answer is probably, well, we don't know that it will work. Um, but if we are guided by the values of trust and relationships, I have 100% faith that it would. And we see this happening every time we bring people together in a new way, in a way that voices can be heard. Stuff happens. It happens all the time. Happens in staff teams. It happens in cross-sector partnerships. It happens in community. When you liberate people to be able to connect properly around their passions, stuff happens. So this is just two photos. We've got a bunch of young people who lots of stuff going on in their lives, came together, created a film, and they're off to the Houses of Parliament this weekend, actually, to go and meet some MPs and have a bit of a voice and experience how that might feel. And then the other example is where a group of residents from another neighbourhood, Dumbarton and St Budo, have come together and they're connecting across. If you look closely, there's a web of connections between people as they're starting to share assets. And stuff just comes out of stuff like that. You know, people just get on and do things in their community when they're given both permission and capacity to do so. Final slide. Oh, it is working. Anyway, I wasn't sure whether the animation would work. So it just repeats what I've kind of already said. You know, it needs to start with self, but ourselves are all across the system. So if ourselves are shifting across the system, then we are going to have a positive reinforcing influence on each other. So what can we do in places where we are able to connect in physical proximity across all these different boundaries in ways that actually start to create the change that I think we're all talking about? Yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Matt. So much there. And I love some of the questions you posed. How do we enable community voice and participation without destroying the value of grassroots activity? How do we move from power over to power with? And I think the message in all of this, it takes all of us. We've all got a role. How do we support each other through that and step into our power and also actually step back and create space for others at times? So at this point, I'm happy to hand over to Damien Allen and John Gleek from Doncaster Council, who are going to share a little bit about what they're doing to embed kind of relational, collaborative and adaptive approaches. Over to you.
Thank you, Dawn, and if we could see the slides, that'd be great. First of all, can I apologise for being slightly late? I've been busy talking to the governors of our 4 prisons in Doncaster about Thrive, so it is a relevant late arrival. First of all, you might want to know who I am. I am the Chief Executive City of Doncaster Council, and I'll also ask John to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everyone, really great to be here today. My name is John Gleek, and I also work for the City of Doncaster Council, and I'm Head of Policy, Insight and Change, and one of my roles here is to be the sort of programme lead for the Thrive programme, which we'll talk about today.
Excellent. And in a typically unrehearsed way, we're going to try and sort of navigate our way through this presentation. So if I could ask for the next slide, please. So I want to say a little bit about what Team Doncaster Thrive is. First of all, I ought to say what Team Doncaster is and what it isn't. First of all, it's an ethos of collaboration, progress and positivity. It's membership of everybody in the place. It's not private or elite group. It's very much about making a positive difference to people in their place. And that can be through whatever role that they perform, be they a volunteer, somebody who's employed, or indeed a neighbour, parent, or just a friend of Team Doncaster. It does have a formal governance structure, which is the Team Doncaster Executive. It is chaired by the City of Doncaster Mayor, Mayor Ros Jones, and it brings together the community, the voluntary sector, the private and the public sector as part of our recognised strategic partnership. Its role as an executive is to oversee the borough strategy, which is Doncaster delivering together. That is a whole system, whole place, whole person approach with well-being at its heart. Sort of begs then, well, what's Thrive? Well, it sits at the heart of our mission, which is Doncaster becoming a thriving people places, because it's a place of places, and of course the planet. And it builds on, I think, a history of community engagement and collaboration. But as the mayor said when she was re-elected, said that she wanted to go deep and local in a different way. And that sort of led us to a series of pieces of work that we've been doing around asset-based community development, locality working, but it also enabled us to grab somebody else's great ideas, i.e. Toby and Co. And the Liberated Method, which spoke to the sort of relationship-based approach that we wanted to bring to public services. So that is, I suppose, our version of Liberated Method is called Thrive. It's a framework for a way of working, and it provides us with a fresh focus on integrated neighbourhood working, locality working, with a preventative and community-centric approach. So it is, however, founded upon a blueprint which has a clear vision and a breakdown of a number of what we are calling interrelated capabilities. And at the heart of it is the underpinning theory, which is around Human.Learning.Systems, and in particular, learning cycles as opportunities to learn from the work that we're all engaged in. So if I could have the next slide. Just to outline what some of those 5 capabilities that I will expand on a little bit more. But first of all, it's a local Team Doncaster delivery model. And the benefit of bringing in a whole system approach is that actually you've got to have some, what I would call enabling structures and some middle tier capacity. So we've got some governance that we've put in place that is much simpler, I think. And that also means that we try and do the work rather than talk about doing the work. And that means a good indicator of that is trying to reduce the meetings. But it's also because we have a core city and a number of key principal towns and other large mining villages, it means that we've also got to take a view that is both diverse and bespoke in terms of the different communities that we serve. So it's a really important principle in terms of design, that it is bespoke by design. The second bit is that we've got to structure how it is we operate in that area as a local authority, but also with our partners, and that includes colleagues in the health sector, the police, but also schools and the voluntary community sector. And to do that, you really need a point of connection in the place. And we have reorganised all of our services so that there is a coordinating role at a locality level. There are elected members that have got a sort of slightly strategic role beyond their ward membership for some of those localities. And that actually our own tiered structure means that executive directors each have ownership of a particular locality, and that we have replicated that at locality and indeed neighbourhood level. And that neighbourhood level is the hyper-local level, where we've identified particular neighbourhoods through a number of insight pieces of work, but also they present themselves in terms of some of the multiple challenges. And we've got a program called Regenerative Neighbourhoods. So I can have the next slide. And I mentioned earlier around the key areas around prevention and early intervention, and some of that is around the great work that we've done over a long period of time around early intervention and prevention, but actually it's shifting away from the doing to and for to by and with, and that means much more bottom-up solutions and using that as an opportunity for that learning that we talked about, but also to maximise the release potential of the existing assets that are in the place. And that in some cases means that we actually relinquish, coming back to the earlier presentation, the power and allow some of the soft power from some of the other anchor organisations to lead in our stead. And at the heart of this is not just whole system and sort of leadership at a relational level, but actually getting right deep into the working practices of all of our services. So this isn't just from the Chief Exec's Directorate, it is every single directorate in the council looking at the ways in which relational practice can operate differently, including challenging some of the established practice models. Because fundamentally it's around the conversation and the interaction so that the member of the community doesn't have to navigate their way around our services or indeed our partner services. I mentioned the importance of a leadership role. We've spent the last 5 years building different leadership at elected member level, and when we've talked about getting the commitment from the mayor all the way down, it's also meant that we've had to invest in developing the knowledge and skills of our elected members as well. I'm going to just move us on again, if that's okay, to the next slide, and hand over to John.
Fab. So, hi everyone. So one of the things that we've had to do as we've sort of operationalized and made real this Thrive work is how do we take some of the sort of strategic capabilities that we want to set out as a council and as a system, and how do we make them very real to people in their jobs and their work, but also think about how that impacts the system as well. So that's where we thought the sort of human learning systems approach was particularly helpful and useful to design and set out, test and innovate particular bits of work, and that is about how we understand and manage and work differently, but also how different practitioners and different places can try things too. And it was quite a helpful sort of framework for us to go about that. And for us, it sort of combined a set of, I guess, methodologies that we've used in different ways. So things like appreciative inquiry has been really fundamental to a lot of our public health and community development work over the years. Similarly, things like sort of design thinking and systems thinking, all those approaches have been really helpful when we've been doing sort of strategies work. So we actually thought the human learning systems work was particularly helpful as a way of thinking and a way of working to try out and test and develop and embed some of these capabilities that Damien's just talked through. If you could show the next slide, please. So I guess, what does this mean in the real world? So we've developed, and this has been very iterative and it's been growing and changing over time, but we've developed, I guess, a sort of portfolio of different learning cycles, different learning experiments, and different things that practitioners across the council and across that Team Doncaster partnership want to have a go at and work differently with and for. So we've sort of chunked these up into 3 blocks, but inevitably they sort of blur into each other. So we have some what we've called operational ones, but these are about how particularly kind of frontline teams across different agencies can collaborate, work together and work in multidisciplinary teams and in multidisciplinary forums to work with either disadvantaged or people who may be at risk of falling through the gaps. So, for example, people who are high intensity users of A&E, people who are frequent attenders at A&E, or people who are frequent attenders or GP GP practices. How can we think about different ways of supporting them, which isn't necessarily in those services? And then at the sort of the tactical level, it's about that geography and that place-based working and that locality working. So how can we develop and test and try out those kind of new meetings and network setups that Damien talked about earlier? How can we try and think about how do we land priorities and priority setting in a multidisciplinary sort of geography? And then the kind of strategic and cross-cutting ones, so the block on the right, are kind of organizational developmental, and they're kind of they're almost a bit sort of meta, but they're really about ways of working and these came out of a sort of learning and development forum that we have, and we have a sort of action learning sets that are coming together now to specifically talk about things like having a go and failing, and the importance of holding our nerve, the importance of trust, relationships, and equitable representation. So we've kind of set out, we've sort of described this as a portfolio of learning. So, and this is a constantly changing set of things, but we wanted to sort of showcase some of the very practical things that people are trying, testing, and using that sort of human learning systems approach in line with Thrive for. So if you just flick onto the next slide, please. This is a sort of learning slide as a summary from the ones on the left are the ones that were around sort of the cohorts of people. So, for example, there have been cases where where practitioners have designed experiments and they've come up from their own ideas. There might be social workers, there could be GPs, there could be people who work in the hospital, and want to try something differently with people they know or they're concerned that they're not supporting in the best they can. So we already have a sort of huddle methodology that's been particularly useful for adult social care clients. So we've been trying to expand that with these other individuals. So, for example, homeless individuals, or as I said, people who are frequently attending A&E or frequently attending GP practices. So we've been practitioners have been taking some of those clients to these kind of huddles and multidisciplinary teams and community conversations. And whilst the stuff on the right, the things that we've learned, is absolutely not rocket science, and I'm sure colleagues all across the call would recognise some of that learning about the importance of information sharing, the importance of practitioners and colleagues developing partnerships, the right people being in the right room, and some of the nuts and bolts and stuff like data sharing and consent, stuff like that. None of that stuff is rocket science, but it's really important that colleagues actually go through some of that learning journey, feel it and see it with their own cases, and that change is kind of felt and seen, rather than it ever being sort of imposed. Well, someone over here has learned something, therefore you over there need to do it too. So we wanted to kind of bring some of that, and we're seeing some green shoots in terms of those cases that have come in that way, making a difference in their lives. Okay, we flick on, and I'll hand back over to Damien to talk about this in the context of national policy as well.
Thanks, John. I suppose the first thing I have to say is I have a healthy disrespect for national policy, and national government policy never mandated what mattered, and all action is socially situated and socially embedded in its place, and that's where I think the learning needs to take place. It's heartening. I think that government's starting to look not just at public sector reform in terms of the machinery of government, but is also looking at the way in which actually we manifest that in terms of the work that we do. So for us, it's really important. I suppose the context is that obviously the Evolution White Paper and also some pressures in terms of not just the public purse, but actually the ability to continue as we are doing without doing things differently. And we think the catalytic approach in terms of Thrive and I suppose the learning by doing, but also that learning as a management strategy is at the core of how we're going to be able to adapt and manage our way into this way. Some of it is born out of previous versions of things like Total Place, and where part of the we'll work with anybody actually if it's going to sort of advance our agenda, and we'll work with colleagues as part of the Total Place too. And in fact, our primary care colleagues were leading at a session just last week around the NHS neighbourhood care agenda, and got an incredible amount of engagement and with their clinical colleagues across the piece. So we're operating at a number of levels, and I think for me, that catalyst has to provide some sort of shift, both in terms of the left shift that we'll see at system level, but we're also very committed to movements, and because we think that they are more likely to sustain societal shifts, but also organisational learning and development as well. So we want our colleagues to be action learners in their own work, but we also want our citizens to be action learners in their own lives. So I'm going to hand back, John, for the last.
Okay, so just to click on to the next one, please. So I guess we thought we wanted to finish off about how this is actually going to come together as a piece of work. So how do we make Thrive a sort of both a way of working and an ethos, but also a tangible set of things that we will be doing as a place? So I'm obviously not going to read all this out, and it'll be good to send it out afterwards. But we wanted to sort of set out some of the sort of mayoral priorities and some of the big city plans that we have. through that sort of what column. So some of the big things that we know we'll be doing in Doncaster, and what that actually means on the right in terms of this setting out as a Thrive programme. So, for example, the second one down. So we know, because it's a priority for the a regional level through the Pathways to Work programme, that we will be having a new offer around employment and employment support. But it's through the Thrive programme that we want to make sure that lands. So it's not a sort of another thing that we have to do. And so that's sort of that set of networks, that set of collaborations, that set of ways of working, and that set of connections into community groups and community services, it is part of that same thing. So we don't set up a whole sort of splinter set of priorities and networks. And then if you flick onto the last slide, this is kind of about what the sort of the job is, and what's my job is really at the moment, to try and knit all this together. So this sort of funnel of things on the right is how we sort of see the future of this coming together. And I guess this also reflects on sort of the skills of sort of 21st century public servants as well. Like, this is the sort of the job for me at the moment, how you knit this stuff together. So that strategic priorities, the stuff we set out at the beginning, 5 things that we want to deliver as a place, sort of Thrive capabilities. Aligning that to what we know is coming out of resident voice, coming out of local priorities, coming out of appreciative inquiry, coming out of all the rich engagement that we're doing in a place, and that insight from that sort of those test and learn experiments, those learning cycles, they will come together to be our work. They will come together to be our sort of locality plans, and that together is the sort of the glue that holds them together. So together we will want that to come together as a coherent set of sort of plans and deliverables. That in itself is a learning cycle. That in itself is a thing is a job that will never be finished, and a job that we will continue to iterate and learn together. So this is how we will sort of continue to deliver this work. I think that's it from us. And thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks so much, Damien. That was fascinating to hear, that kind of ambition of a real whole place partnership approach with learning, collaboration, relational practice at the centre. And John, I particularly appreciated your point about it's important that everyone sees and feels this practice. It's not about forcing people into it. You have to experience it. And I think that picks up on things that Fozia, Eric, Matt all said about, like, it's a different way of being. It's about personal change as well as the structural and technical change needed. So finally, I'm really pleased to hand over to Adrian Doherty from the North East Combined Authority. I guess, Adrian, you were one step further removed in terms of geography at that regional level. What's your perspective on all of this?
Thank you. I don't have a presentation. I'm going to do some reflections on where we are as a combined authority, and maybe touch on some of the content that we've had from others, although I am conscious we've got 20 minutes left and we want some contributions from people who are patiently waiting as well. So I will try and keep it fairly brief. So yes, I am representing the North East Combined Authority, where I am Head of Public Service Innovation. And we are a combined authority of 7 constituent authorities. So that's Durham, Gateshead, Newcastle, North Tyneside, Northumberland, South Tyneside, and Sunderland up in the northeast. So aware of the work that's been referenced from Gateshead, and it's fantastic, isn't it? It was great to hear the passion that we heard from colleagues from Gateshead earlier on, from Fozia and Eric. So we're a relatively, I think we are part of an increasing gang of combined authorities who are really leaning into this public service reform agenda, and we are taking the Human-Learning.Systems approach in principle. I think it's probably worth saying we aren't standing next to HLS and saying, yes, we are adopting this wholesale. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I think, one, we don't really deliver as a combined authority. We work through partners and with our constituent local authorities. And it's not really for us to say we need to adhere to this approach completely. We've taken the principles. I've spent some time with Toby and was absolutely, every time I meet Toby, my brain hurts, but I always come back with a renewed sense of, okay, how do we embed this better? How do we work to some of the principles? So I think we are using sort of that adaptive, people-centered and relational approach to public services where we can, but acknowledging actually we are in that slightly awkward bit of public service. And I think the big win for us will be to influence what's happening at the centre. And it feels as though there are a number of combined authorities who and indeed local authorities. And it's interesting hearing Damien's contributions, where we'll be able to influence how central government approach this. I'll touch on a couple of examples in terms of things we're actually doing. So in January, the North East Combined Authority committed to a portfolio of public service reform, which had some pilot funding attached to it, had fairly big ambitions. Part of that's about working across all of our existing portfolios, so transport, housing, economic development, but it's also about a specific radical prevention program as well. So taking all that learning around radical prevention funds, but turning that hopefully into a program. That program will focus on a series of interventions around best start in life, barriers to work, health inequalities, residents facing multiple and complex needs, and healthy aging. But I guess where this touches on human learning systems is how we're engaging other parties to support us with that. So that public service reform portfolio is built on quite a strong statement of intent, and that statement of intent has been co-written with 7 local authority chief executives and huge input from their teams. The Combined Authority, obviously, NHS through the Integrated Care Board and specific hospital trusts, fire and rescue, police constabularies, big input from VCSE representatives, housing, transport, schools, colleges, higher education, Department for Education, Department for Work and Pensions. We've really engaged with as many people as possible within the system. Our next step is absolutely about engaging residents with lived experience and communities. So we know that is to come, but at the moment we are still crafting our space on public service reform as a discrete program. Where we have delivered under the umbrella of PSR is around school improvement and child poverty. We've also done some work on digital inclusion, and it's probably worth just flagging some of the things we've learned through this work. So quite unusually, as a combined authority, we are working on school improvement. We're calling it educational excellence and educational improvement, because it's not the sort of school improvement traditionally done by local authorities or indeed by multi-academy trusts. We're less concerned, I suppose, about the performance of a school in a traditional sense, and far more interested in the academic outcomes of the young people in the schools. So we are working broadly. We know that we're working across 550 schools on our patch. We are driving up reading ages for some of our most disadvantaged pupils. We are starting to see some gaps close where we want to see gaps close. We are starting to see exclusions reduce. It's still in the green shoots phase, but it's really promising data. And we know that the retention of teachers serving the most disadvantaged communities is stronger because of our interventions, and indeed the leadership pipeline. That is, I think, quite important when it comes to this conversation, because we've developed all of that work by listening to local authorities, listening to multi-academy trusts, engaging with charities supporting schools, working with our teaching school hubs, working with our research schools, working with universities, but indeed working with schools themselves and listening to schools. We established a grants program for our schools, and I think that's where we were able to use the big system bit, but enable some of the community level intervention that we've heard about today. And I think part of the role of combined authorities, local authorities, is to provide a bit of that buffer. So we were able to, as I say, establish a grants program, small grants that gave us a couple of things. We set out very clearly what we were trying to address and improve, and then we trusted schools who, once they'd applied, to deliver what they said they would deliver, and we helped to give them a bit of space to do that, and really use that HLS approach, I suppose, to not overly focus on outputs. For instance, yes, there were broad outputs, but we weren't hounding schools for monthly returns. That told us that schools were most interested in the first year of delivery in oracy. So we then took that and scaled it, and we funded the biggest cohort of Voice 21 schools in the country, which really helped us. So it was Voice Northeast. It really helped schools come together and build that community of learning, which is fantastic. And frankly, gave us a decent bang for our buck. It meant that schools were engaging with one another on this RSE issue, and beyond the funded program, those relationships, the learning that was being taken back into schools, we've heard and we can see is really having more of an impact because of the cohort approach. But that came up because so many were using that grant fund to address RSE. Similar has been for outdoor learning, approaches to cultural capital, so and indeed family learning sessions as well. So we're listening to schools and finding out what they want to address, and then baking that into our bigger strategy. We also heard that the idea of the 1 year funding cycle is obviously a real issue, not just for schools, but for the voluntary community sector, and really everyone working in the system. And we've been really careful to again try and provide as much of a buffer as we can. We take through a further ask to our cabinet for a 3 year programme in March, so we're excited to see how that goes. It is March, brilliant. So later this month, so the North East Combined Authority cabinet will discuss that and hopefully give a bit of long-term commitment to that, or mid-term commitment. On the child poverty prevention programme and reduction programmes, it's been a similar story. We've done quite a bit of work in this space, but recently our mayor hosted a summit. We had 350 representatives in the room, which is brilliant. We've then followed up and held 7 roundtables to really find out from the people who are frontline delivering this, grassroots, so local authorities, but predominantly grassroots organisations really delivering on the front line. We are turning that into a 5-year action plan, not just for the Combined Authority, but for the region, to work with regional partners. And we are, again, the next phase of this to inform the action plan is engagement with residents with lived experience. We've struggled with that previously, and we've learned a lot from the struggles that we've had, and we feel fairly well equipped to do this version of it. And we are about to do that following our 11 roundtables. That's probably all I can go into now based on time. What I will say is I think that there's a bit of a moment, isn't there, with central government? And I know we're talking about single settlements. I think we need to be sensible about single settlements, and we need to be talking across services. We need all services to be on the table there. So boundaries and geography not aligning doesn't help us do this properly. We're working against the grain essentially, but getting commitment from NHS, an ICB that's far bigger than our footprint, but a commitment to working with us is really helpful. It's a good step in that direction, but getting commitment from central government on sort of single settlement that includes DWP, DFE, the bits, the arm's length bodies, Homes England and what have you, being able to say actually we're sensible about this, and we can really embed this approach at a local level is going to be key for the future of this work. If we want to take the examples we've heard from so many people this afternoon, if we really want to embed that in a system for sort of long-term change, which is what we're all after, then we really do need to work with the grain, not against it. I'll probably leave it there.
Thanks so much, Adrian. I loved hearing about your role as connector, enabler, that role of listening and learning and building your capabilities as a combined authority to do those things. And we've really spanned right from the community level right through to thinking about how does national government play a role in enabling this. So we've had such rich conversations. Unfortunately, we don't have loads of time to questions, but I think one of the key things coming out in the chat is about how to get started, how to enable people to step into this work. As Adrian just said, it runs against the grain, but we do need to encourage people to kind of show up differently, engage differently, act differently in day-to-day roles. So I'm going to briefly come to our speakers and any thoughts, tips, reflections you have on kind of how to get started. Fozia and Eric, can I come to you first?
I think we've already started, which is a really good thing. I was at the Marmot conference last week, and the language that was being used was really welcoming because I saw a real change, and there was a huge commitment to actually address, the inequalities that we have in society, and Newcastle becoming a Marmot city, which is really, really good news. So there was a huge commitment to actually change things, and Gateshead is already a marmot city, so, and we're very lucky that the director of public health is actually, the same for both authorities. So it makes sense, and we hopefully we are going to see significant change, and we are going to see public services working with communities, and it's been long overdue. But I think there's a huge emphasis on community-led approaches and bringing communities into decision making about them. It's so looking at what's strong in our communities and looking at the strength in our communities, rather than we always human nature, we always think about what's actually wrong in our communities. So I think they've got a really good approach, and we're heading for good times, I think. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Rosie. So signs of hope, there is a shift happening, and I guess all of the examples we've heard today, the more we can profile those, celebrate those, explore what it really takes, the more we can help build this movement together. Eric?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I will raise up is funding. I think the way the funding is shaping around in different sector, different level is quite difficult, because that gives a specific direction to all charity or local movement, how they have to work, and don't give them space for them to build or to think around those funding. So funding are really is good, and it's a really key way people has to work as the funders want. I think the way as Bridge Builder has been formed since 2019, that's been really, really good. We have been formed for working through alongside refugee and asylum seeker, and then that funding has been well used, because we have been working with them, going through with them, and build a lot of capacity. The Bridge Builder have been facilitate a lot of approach between charities, between public sector and the different migrant community, alongside Gateshead community or Sunderland community as well. The Bridge Builder have been more involved, because I'm more involved in the migrant community, where I'm very known in Sunderland Council and Gateshead Council as someone who can relate and facilitate. So I think that is the way how to form. And another way which will be more, because it's like the migrant community or minority community doesn't have spaces where they can meet, where they can discuss, where they can build up. Spaces for migrants community are really, really close, and it's really difficult for different level where they can meet. And secondly, funding as well for migrants community is really difficult. It's really difficult as a community, as a migration community, to access those funding. Yeah. That's where we talk about representative. That's where when I tackle that, they are not represented, because no one is there to talk about them. They are included in the local system, which is good, but no one is there to mention about them, and how do we think to involve them. I think that's one thing that's supposed to be also bring up.
Thanks so much, Eric. So yeah, funding is a really key building block, and not only devolving funding, but ensuring that capacity building is placed so people can engage. Matt, I'll come to you next.
I'm just going to reinforce what Eric had said. So POP has benefited from 6 years of core funding through Esme Fairbairn Foundation. So it's not just having the resource, but it's the type of resource. So it's not the type of resource that says deliver these outcomes. And I know that the community bridge builders have benefited from long-term Langkelly investment, again with a similar kind of approach to the use of the money. I think that's critical, because the constraints placed around money directly shape, and I don't understand why we don't accept that they don't directly shape what then happens. And then I guess, I mean, I can't talk about it directly, but I guess if you're in a larger institution or public sector organization, you often need air cover from a leadership position to be able to create the spaces that might otherwise be needed for this type of work.
Thanks, Matt. And then very briefly, maybe 1 minute each, to John, Damien, and then Adrian. What are your tips? What are your thoughts on how to get started with these ways of working?
Well, first of all, I think have a bias to action and just have a conversation, because that's the currency of change. Start with where you're at, work with who you've got, make small bets. And to paraphrase a current phrase, you need to get the coalescence of the willing. Because you can't convert everybody, but I still think it's important to also challenge mindsets, because inverting HLS as a leadership perspective is a lot easier than trying to combat established and ingrained ways of thinking and ways of doing. But you can't convert everybody on day one, so start close in.
Thanks, Damien. Brilliant tip. And Adrian, how about you?
I think I'd just like to build on that point, on Damien's point, actually. I think some of the missteps I've seen from within my team and with colleagues has been trying to convert those who were not ready for conversion. And actually, if you get down to it, there are very few people who will argue with the outcomes from the work. And it's about winning hearts and minds, isn't it? And why are we doing this? And some people see it straight away, and some people really struggle with it. There's a risk involved, isn't there, when you talk about doing things differently, and if you have to put your metrics to one side for a little while, and they're a bit of a comfort blanket. So actually encouraging people to look at the outcome, the research. This is why we're proposing we do this, and this is what it'll look and feel like when we're successful. I think that those conversations have been far more fruitful than, can I talk to you about something that sounds a little bit policy wonkish? Perhaps you're not naturally keen to lean into that.
Thanks, Adrian. So connecting about what matters to people rather than with the theory often is what works best. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining today, and particularly to our speakers, such rich examples with some common threads, but really specific to context, place, roles, and the different capabilities we can all bring. Apologies we didn't have much time for questions. What we will be doing is trying to synthesize some of the themes from today and bring them together in a blog to keep this conversation going, and also to share some practical examples from all of our speakers today. I think what I'm taking away is it doesn't really matter what we call it. It's about the principles. It's about being relational, being collaborative, rebalancing power, and taking that learning approach. There is no fixed answer, but we need to keep learning and adapting together. And it is that experience of going on that learning journey which makes our practice richer, and it is the work. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope it's provided some inspiration. And if you've got examples to share, please get in touch as well. We'd love to keep sharing those through the HLS network and beyond. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.